Right. Hello, Heather. How are you doing today? Haven't seen you for a little bit.
I know I'm doing really great, Shannon. So just got back from New York and well rested and just ready to get going again. So yeah,
What an exciting way to come out of the Big Apple and dive into the real work here. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, for sure.
Well, appreciate your time today because I know that this is a burning topic and I know we want to talk a little bit about it. I'd love to explore it. I wanted to tap into your experience because I know that you've been taking some certifications and spending some real time on this topic of imposter syndrome. And I know that this has really been prevalent in a fair amount of my clients that I've been working with in the leadership spaces. There's just a lot of that feeling that I'm seeing around clients are in really critical roles and they're doing great work, but they're still just not feeling like they should be there or that something's missing. And it's just this interesting concept of, confidence and feeling like they're in that right place. And so I thought this would be a really good time with your experience and the work and the certifications you've been taking on this broad topic to maybe have a chat about this today.
Yeah, I'd love that. And I know, it's so interesting because when I first started exploring imposter syndrome, I thought, a lot of it was a women's thing, like, oh, it's a women's topic and really, it really impacts us as women. And so, through my research and doing the training through the Imposter Syndrome Institute, really recognizing that it impacts men and women. And actually, for statistically, 70% of men and women have experienced imposter syndrome at some time in their career, which is
Oh.
amazing in the way that it's more of the majority than the minority of people that have experienced it. And like you said, Shannon, working with our clients as they continue to move up through organizations, you think they're building confidence, and as they move into these different roles, and a lot of them still struggle with, do I belong? I don't know if I'm the right person for that job. Do I have the experience? Do I have, the training to actually go into that position? So it's a really interesting topic that creates, um, even though it's an irrational thought, but the true feeling is that self-doubt, right? Do I even belong here?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you mention, men in the workplace. I had one of my clients not that long ago who just, it was through a conversation, he just said, I think I am an imposter here. And it was such a bold statement. And, we really worked through some of that, his manager and others, had more confidence in him than himself. And that was really enlightening to me working with a male colleague or counterpart or client. So that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
something. Yeah. So my first question is if you're able to distinguish what is imposter syndrome and what it's not.
Yeah. So what it is really this fear or self-doubt that we're not smart enough or good enough, or we move into, we get promoted and we're like, I think they've hired the right person, or we're creating a lot of this doubt. And even though there's a lot of data that supports, we are where we belong, we still doubt ourselves. And so again, it's this really irrational thought that comes up that creates that real sense of, but that real feeling of self-doubt. And so when we think about imposter syndrome, often people think like syndrome, it's this medical diagnosis or there, something. It's not about that at all. It's just this feeling that is created where, we do doubt ourselves and the abilities and feel that, we're going to get caught. Someone's going to find out that I don't really know what I'm talking about or what I'm doing. And so we're constantly, in this state of, anxiety or worry that we're not enough sometimes.
Yeah. The self-doubt really stood out for me when you said that because, there's times where we doubt our abilities in the moment, where
Yeah,
we're handed a big, new project that we're maybe not as skilled at, and there's that doubt. But then there's the feeling of just, I may not be worthy enough to have this at all. It's quite a distinction, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
And you've already alluded to it, but it's seemingly really common in the workplace, even in today's environment.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
really, really common. Wow. what would you say is the difference between imposter syndrome and self-esteem? Because I know, we talk a little bit about that, and you kind of hear that out in the wavelengths that it's a self-esteem issue, but it's different again. Is it?
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, and I love that question because it is really different than self-esteem. So I think about self-esteem as this global perspective, right? How we see ourselves globally. But when we look at imposter syndrome, it's more specific to achievement arenas like work, business, school, or career. And so if you think about it, when you're maybe hanging out with friends or you're shopping online, like you don't have those imposter feelings. But when you're asked to do a big presentation, or maybe you're getting ready to move to the next level in your career, and it's when you have those big feelings of self-doubt. So really specific to achievement arenas, and so not about how we view ourselves, with that self-esteem perspective.
Okay, so achievement oriented. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what would you say? So if we think about, so achievement's a really big thing. And I know with my clients, it's really, they question, am I really doing, the impact that I want to be seen as, or am I really doing enough? Or how do I know, as the more senior we get, the less validation we get too? Because in
Yeah.
our early careers, we get validation along the way. Somebody's correcting us and guiding us, but the more senior we get, that feedback doesn't come quite as freely. So we have to kind of validate, but it's interesting that there's still this real need for achievement, and it's a strong orientation. Um, so with that in mind, how do we cope with imposter syndrome? So if we do struggle with that from time to time, what might be some three coping mechanisms you might want to share?
Yeah. So it's interesting how, we have these coping mechanisms and we create them really to protect ourselves, right? So, nobody likes to fail, or nobody likes to, have a bad day, or not do well. And so we create these coping mechanisms to really protect ourselves, and knowing that, they're there when I think of them as like to serve and protect, and that's why we have them created. But three of the most common coping mechanisms are, flying under the radar, where it's, coming in and really like, downplaying ourselves, maybe going to a meeting, not speaking up when we want to speak up, or maybe it's about not going to that next level and really kind of flying under the radar where we're not being noticed, right? The next one is procrastination. Now, don't get me wrong, because we all procrastinate. And I think about, my house is extremely clean when I have things to do and I'm procrastinating. So I do that instead of the things I need to do. But it's procrastinating when it's that fear of failure. So I'm kind of procrastinating doing something. Maybe I want to launch a new business program, or maybe I want to pitch a new idea, but I procrastinate in presenting that idea, because if I keep it in the moment of thinking about it and not actually doing, and if it doesn't become successful, I haven't failed because I'm still thinking about it, right? So kind of in that procrastination mode. And then the last one is really, and again, something super common that we do is that overworking and over preparing. So you think about, I know sometimes at work when I first started teaching, had to do my lesson plan, and I'd have these like 10-page detailed lesson plans, and I was overworking and over preparing. And really, I didn't need that, right? I just needed, 1 or 2 pages, but putting in all that extra time, putting in all, thinking about, what are possible questions people are going to ask me? How do I be prepared? What if someone asks me something I don't know? So we overwork and over prepare so that we're super prepared, right? And so those also
Mm,
help protect us from those feelings of, shame or that self-doubt, right? So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think we've all noticed that in ourselves. And, it's interesting. So the three coping mechanisms, so flying under the radar, so playing it safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that fear of failure. So not putting ourselves maybe out there or trying something, because if it fails, that hits our achievement orientation,
Yeah.
that need for
Yeah.
achievement. So we'll maybe hold back. And I can kind of resonate with the business
Yeah.
pitch or idea, because we're all entrepreneurs, growing our own businesses. But
Yeah.
I've experienced that. It's sort of like, oh, okay, well, I don't know if that marketing tip is gonna, maybe make a difference. Or so hold back or procrastinate on it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the over prepare. So that brings to mind so many clients that I work with around perfectionism.
Yes.
And I don't know, like there seems to be some real correlation between this perfectionism that's really, really driving a lot of people as well. Um, Now, I've been reading quite a bit that perfectionism, not that it is a trait of imposter syndrome, but I get a sense that they're really highly connected. Would you say that there's perfectionism on its own, or is it definitely very much imposter syndrome driven?
Yeah, I would say this. So, a lot of my training and certification has come through the Imposter Syndrome Institute, which is one of the co-founders is Dr. Valerie Young, and she's done 40 years of research around imposter syndrome. And what she started to notice was that people start to relate their achievements based on or their how they feel competent versus confidence. And so she came up with 5 competency types. And so one of them is perfectionism. So
Okay.
it's about
Mhm.
how we perform, right? And so,
Yeah.
think about I don't know if you've ever done a presentation and you present it and it's really good. So you nail it, but then you realize after, oh my gosh, I forgot one slide or I forgot to mention this one point. And then we ruminate, right? We ruminate because it's not perfect or
Yeah.
99% is right, 1% is incorrect. So that perfectionism is definitely, there's a definite correlation between, you know, perfectionism and syndrome, cinnamon, I said syndrome,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's one of the 5 competencies that she's identified. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
It completely makes sense because I so see that correlation,
yeah,
very much so. And we had many great conversations with clients on how to kind of let go of the perfectionism. And it's almost it really raises this anxiety to think so that good enough in many times can be good enough.
yeah,
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 it's an interesting thought.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, you've indicated there's 5 competency types. Would you want to maybe share a little bit on the other 4?
Sure. So the next one is the expert. So it's more about how much do you know? So it's not about I want to be an expert or I'm going to keep trying to be like expert level, but it's really about what do you know? And so we think about it. And I'm going to say a lot of people I know will do this. Like they'll get a lot of certifications, training before they want to put themselves out there. So they're like, I'm not ready yet because I need this certificate or I need to do this training or I need to get some more experience. So really focusing around, being the expert. The next one is natural genius. So oftentimes, for a natural genius, what they do is things come really easy for them. So when things become hard, then they step back a little bit because, things shouldn't be hard. So things should be easy. So when I am challenged, I kind of pull myself back. And you can see, right, some of these coping mechanisms flying under the radar and kind of, laying a bit low. The next one is a soloist, and they want to do, it's not really about how you're going to do it, but it's like who's going to do it. So they'll typically do the work themselves. They don't ask for help. They're probably not going to get coaching or mentoring. They feel like they should be able to learn everything and know everything on their own. And then the last one is the superhuman. So we feel that we should be the super parent or super colleague or super leader. And so we try to be perfect in all of these roles that we show up for and almost to the point of, burnout, right? Because we're trying to do everything. They'll be the first to volunteer, if something's coming up or, and having trouble with those boundaries, for especially from a coaching perspective, we think about, when I say yes to something, what am I saying no to? And the superhuman, they
Mhm.
want to show up and be able to do it all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think those are some really good tips for people who are leading others. And if they're
Yeah.
starting to really see some of these traits coming out, like the superhuman, or somebody whom is kind of maybe holding back or be trying to become expert, to just feel like they can do the work. So there's definitely some telltale signs.
Mhm.
Sounds that, well, peers, leaders, anybody who's working with others can be kind of on the lookout for some of these particular traits for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, Shanna, because I think maybe if you don't personally experience imposter syndrome, but if you lead, manage, train people, it's really important to know and understand, what imposter syndrome is, and how these people are feeling. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And it's not going to be probably a readily identified condition, I'll call it, in regular conversation. There's probably some nuances that are, obviously pretty obvious, but not always. So that's interesting.
yeah.
So last question is, so what can we do? So what might be a tool that people can do today that may address their imposter syndrome? And as a manager, if you're seeing somebody on your team who's maybe experiencing some of these competency types, what might be a step that you can take?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it's about really normalizing it, right? And having those conversations and talking about imposter syndrome. I think that's really important. And a tool, I think it's really about noticing and naming. So starting to notice when you're having those feelings, those imposter type feelings, and being able to notice, what is the impact it's having on me? And even taking it a step further, what's the cost and consequence to me when I'm feeling that way, right? So whether it's flying under the radar, holding yourself back from work, well, what is the overall cost or impact for you moving forward? And so, I think we both would say, as far as coaching goes, it's that self awareness piece. So you can't change what you don't know. And so it's taking that time to step back and start to notice, when am I feeling that way? Why am I feeling like that way?
Mhm.
And how is it impacting me? Through the cost and consequence, and what can I do to change it? So it's just about stopping and pausing and starting to notice those things that are happening for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Normalizing it. It's
Yeah.
almost sort of that labeling an emotion and
Yeah.
not hiding away from it. It's just labeling it for what it is. It's there and that's okay, but really just understanding that. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think you said an important thing too. It's about labeling that feeling because,
Mhm.
we would, and like, I'd never say, oh, you have imposter syndrome, but I'd say, you have imposter syndrome tendencies or feelings, right? And so we think about, how do we support people going through that process and thinking about, our thoughts impact our feelings, which impact our actions, which impact results, and knowing that when we're dealing with imposter syndrome, it is about those feelings, but feelings are the last to change. So it's about how do we start to shift those thoughts, right? And move us forward and know that feelings will come along, but it's the thoughts that have to change first.
Makes sense completely. Yeah.
Yeah.
As you
Yeah.
indicated, you can't change what you're not aware of. So I think that's really important. So as a manager, if you're noticing that in one of your team members and you want to address it, one of the things I thought was really kind of interesting in one of the webinars, actually, from the institute that I
Yeah.
attended, is it's not always about bringing to mind your achievements. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't, and this I noticed too, is with so many of my clients, and I've been guilty of this, is we don't stop to actually celebrate our accomplishments and recognizing that we actually have some. Obviously
Yeah.
we do, and we just generally don't. We just think, well, that's in the past, it's on, and I got to keep doing more. But it's not all about helping our team members recognize just accomplishments. And I thought that was really interesting. But anything else from a manager perspective in having a conversation or helping their team member, like normalizing and all of that. But
Yeah.
any thoughts around that from just what a manager may do to have that conversation?
Yeah, I think it's about just, kind of understanding, where is that coming from, right? Because you can experience that, and from the manager perspective, and still, like, you want to be supportive, you want to help them. It's not about recognizing, and we talk about, you'll hear fake it till you make it, or write down the list of achievements that you've accomplished, and then that should be helpful for you too. But I think it's about realizing, it's about recognizing within yourself what's going on for you, and then being able to address that, because imposter syndrome impacts everybody so differently, and no two people necessarily experience it the same way. And when we think about, even, I've accomplished this and now I'm on to something else, that, that to me sits in the realm of perfectionism. Like, I have to constantly be moving myself forward. It's not perfect yet, so I'm going to keep going. Right. And so being able to set up those opportunities and situations for people to stop and pause, and to really take time to recognize, the things that they've accomplished, and then, being able to move on. And so it's really, I think, an individual thing. And so that, having the manager have that discussion and finding out, what is it that that person's thinking, right? What patterns do they have, and how do we start to shift those patterns? Yeah. I think too about that Gerald Weinstein, it's called the trumpet model. And it's about looking at your patterns, what's your cost to yourself, and then also looking at how do we move ourselves forward, right? And it takes time. It takes time to be able to do that too. Yeah.
Yeah. We just don't, all of a sudden make that radical shift overnight, but recognizing it first, and then creating some opportunities to make those small changes.
Yeah.
Well, this has been amazing, Heather. Thanks so much. And I learned some really interesting things here, just on the distinction, the differences, and the competencies. And I can totally see where those show up. And I know that this can be a beneficial resource for others to just build more awareness on this very important topic. So I appreciate your time today. It's great.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me.
Very welcome. All right. Thanks, Heather.
Okay. Thank you.